Hello there, good people, and welcome to It's a Shaw Thing. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. We're talking some fantasy football, an exciting week in the NFL. Let's get you caught up with the Week 9 action. And we'll start off with the good news first and who's moving on up, and then we'll discuss who's moving down. Well, we start with Derek Ward of the New York Giants. We knew he was talented, but the same goes for Ahmad Bradshaw, as well as Brandon Jacobs. But how many fantasy running backs do the Giants actually have? For a while, the answer was 1, but after his first touchdown of the season, I'm thinking the answer should be 2. Derek Ward scored his first touchdown this weekend. He had 89 total yards. The yards are quite familiar for the guy so far this year. In 8 games played, 622 total yards in offense. That's a pretty impressive number. In fact, it's more reliable than some guys who start every game, such as a Jamal Lewis or Edgerrin James. So go ahead and scoop this guy up. He did reach the end zone, which shows you that, well, it's not like he repels it, so at least he'll get in on occasion. And so far, the Giants have been going to the ground more often than not. And when the weather gets worse, they're going to continue to go with him. And I like the fact that they're keeping both guys fresh in both Jacobs and Ward. Now, as far as a guy who's definitely not fresh these days, Marion Barber is moving on down for the Dallas Cowboys. This is a guy who's among the fantasy elite when healthy, and he's healthy, but he also needs his surrounding cast to be healthy, and right now the biggest issue for him is that Felix Jones isn't. Now, the last couple of years, Marion Barber's put up wonderful numbers, splitting the backfield with Julius Jones. Got off to a great start this year with Felix Jones also prospering. Well, not anymore. Now that Jones is out, Barber's been put in a situation he is not accustomed to, and quite frankly, he's been exposed as a guy who's simply not a workhorse. This is not a Jamal Lewis. This is not a Larry Johnson. You do not want Marion Barber to get the ball 25, 30 times a game. You prefer him to split the backfield and remain fresh. Until Felix Jones does return, you might want to hold off or look for other options when it comes to your fantasy running back. I would continue to start Barber, just make sure you do keep the expectations a lot lower. All right, next up, Ted Ginn Jr. All of us got excited with his 175-yard performance, wondering, well, is that for real? The answer is yes and no. The potential's there, just like Santana Moss, but he could also just as quickly respond with just 3 grabs because he's not a top target and just 38 receiving yards, such as this past weekend. Ginn Jr. is one of those guys that simply a roll of the dice. On occasion, he'll strike snake eyes, and then you'll have a big day, but more often than not, he's only going to give you 20 to 45 yards. All right, now let's talk about the quarterbacks. The guy who's moving up these days is Sage Rosenfels of the Houston Texans. It's very simple. He's maybe not as good in reality, but when he's in your fantasy team, he gives you the yards and he gives you touchdowns, as well as throwing interceptions and fumbling the ball aplenty. Well, the problem here is that Matt Schaub is injured, so it looks like this guy's going to get the reins of the offense. Not definite. Make sure you do your homework. But right now, Matt Schaub has an ailing knee, and when Rosenfels has played, he's been pretty impressive so far. Who wouldn't be with Owen Daniels out there, Kevin Walter, and of course the big-time Andre Johnson, Steve Slayton at running back, also with a bunch of receptions as well. So if you do see this guy starting for the weekend for the Houston Texans, I do recommend starting him. In fact, he's probably a better option than some guys like Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger. All right, next up, a quarterback that's moving on down, and he tried to get in a shootout with Brett Favre, and he simply lost. The name is Trent Edwards. This is not a guy that a team wants to rely on because the Bills found that out the hard way this weekend. Look at what happened when Marshawn Lynch was ailing. They ended up going to their quarterback, asking him to do a little bit more than he's capable of, and he got his touchdown, but he also threw a couple of interceptions. If you look at the actual numbers so far this season, they're pretty disgraceful. 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, not horrible, but then there's the 4 fumbles as well. Most importantly, if you're looking for a big game, Edwards is not your answer. In fact, he hasn't had 1 game so far this year with multiple passing touchdowns. Edwards is a solid quarterback. He's straight down the line. But if you're looking for someone who's going to give you a little more of an edge for a fantasy weekend, he is not the best option. Again, I would prefer Sage Rosenfels or even Gus Frerotte. Well, my friends, that is your fantasy football report. We'll have plenty more coming up this week. Just visit right back here at opensports.com.
So you think you can tackle a pro? There's only one way to find out. Click on fantasy at opensports.com.